she's going to talk to us about her work assessing the health of wild dolphins in order to inform our interpretations of the effects of the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. So with that, I'm going to let her get started.
Great. Thank you guys all so much for showing up in the Estuarium, for having us come talk today. Like she said, my name is Dr. Alissa Deming. I'm the veterinarian for the Marine Mammal Research Center based here at Dauphin Island Sea Lab. So my primary job is to assess the health of the manatees, dolphins, and whales in the Alabama area. And that comes with a few different hats that we wear. We do a lot of research associated with the animals that strand on this beach as carcasses. So any dead whales or dolphins that you guys see showing up on the beach provide valuable scientific research and data for us to establish what the health of the population looks like in general. We also respond to live marine mammal strandings, and this month we've had a couple live strandings. A pantropical spotted dolphin came up in Theodore, Alabama, and then we had a pygmy sperm whale that just showed up on Sunday over in Gulf Shores. So we'll respond to any live animals that are in distress and assess whether or not we think they could be rehabilitated, and if they can, we'll transport them to the closest rehabilitation hospital to be rehabbed and then released. Or we humanely euthanize them if they're in really bad shape and they're not going to be able to survive that transport or make it through rehab. And most of the time when animals show up on these beaches, they are really, really sick, because a marine mammal is never supposed to be up on the beaches. So if you ever see a dolphin, whale, or manatee up on the beaches or being tossed around in the waves, you can call our number, which is 1-877-WHALE-HELP, and we have those magnets over there, and we'll come out and try and help that animal out. So today I'm going to focus a little bit more on our dolphin health assessments that we're just getting started here in Dauphin Island, and kind of talk about the reasons why it's really important for us to do this, and then kind of go over what it takes to do a dolphin doctor's appointment. It's definitely very similar to a doctor's appointment that your dog would get, or maybe you would get at your doctor's office, but it's a lot more intensive and way more people are involved in it. So we'll kind of go over that stuff too. And then I'll kind of end with the findings that we've had doing these health assessments and why it's important to continue them and actually start doing them here in Dauphin Island to get a better understanding of the health of this population. And this is pretty informal. If you guys have questions when we're talking about stuff, just raise your hand or shout out, and we can stop and kind of discuss any questions you have. If I use any words that don't make sense, please let me know. I know I paid a lot of money to learn them, so I'm happy to explain what they mean. So without further ado, we have a couple handouts for you guys. Most of you should have this oil spill handout. If you didn't, they're right up at the door. And this just kind of goes over the findings that they've had. I'm sure a lot of you know in 2010 there was the Deepwater Horizon oil spill that happened in the Gulf of Mexico out in the middle of the ocean. And this kind of goes over the findings of how that impacted dolphins, mostly in Louisiana, from 2010 to 2014. So just a little bit of background on all of that. This is a graph that you can find in there, or an image you can find in there, and it shows each one of these dots represents a marine mammal that stranded along the northern coast during 2010 to 2014. And they started seeing after the oil spill that there was an uptick in the number of marine mammals that showed up on the beaches in this area. So they wanted to figure out health-wise why these dolphins were dying. So they were doing full necropsies, which is an autopsy on an animal, on a dolphin, to determine why these animals were showing up on the beaches. But as you guys know, it gets really hot here in the summer, so these animals kind of cook pretty quickly when they're just laying out on the beaches, and that compromises the samples. So there's only a limited amount of stuff we can find out from a lot of those animals. So the National Marine Mammal Foundation and NOAA got together to start doing health assessments of dolphins in that area to actually bring live animals into the hands of veterinarians and biologists to take samples to determine why these animals are sick. So there's also a graph that kind of looks like this, a table in your handout, and that kind of goes over, the one on the top talks about, on the far right-hand side of that table, the historical number of strandings of animals within the area. So you'll see that Alabama has about 14 bottlenose dolphins that strand every year prior to the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. And then if you looked at the breakdown of how many animals that stranded from 2010 to 2014 after the oil spill, had a significant increase. And we call that an unusual mortality event. And that's kind of what kicked in a lot of the science that was happening when we realized that an unusual number of dolphins were stranding in this area. And you can see that it's kind of still elevated. In 2014, we had 32 animals in comparison to our baseline of 14 before the oil spill. Basically, we were concerned, or scientists were concerned, that this was really going to affect the populations of dolphins in the northern Gulf. How many dolphins really did get affected by this oil spill, and what's going to be the long-term effects of those dolphin populations. So the graph that's right underneath it kind of give you an estimate of the population that has adverse health effects, which is the far column in your right. And you can see that Alabama is actually not on this list, and that's because there's never been any live animal health assessments in Alabama up until about a month ago. So this is all looking at animals in Louisiana and Mississippi, which are areas that were heavily impacted by the oil spill. But we wanted to know how the animals in Mobile Bay were doing, because these animals also had oil exposure, and their food sources that they're eating also were exposed to oil. So I don't know how many of you were in here earlier when we were talking about the oil dispersants that were used. So there's multiple ways that dolphins can be exposed to oil, or marine animals in general. So the first one is an acute exposure, and that happens right after an oil spill when the animals are surfacing in oil spills themselves and getting it on their skin. And these are marine mammals that breathe air, so when they come up to the surface, their blowhole is in close contact with all of the chemicals that are off-gassing from the oil on the surface of the ocean. So they can also inhale that oil to be exposed to it. More long-term, which is some of the issues we're seeing now with the animals, is there's bioaccumulation of the oil up the food chain. Some people will say the chemical dispersants have increased the bioavailability of the oil, and some people say it's actually helped. I think the science is still out really on that. But there has been proof that in some of the animals, they have been exposed to oil through the food that they're ingesting as well. So you run into a lot of health issues. The main health issues that we're seeing with the dolphins in this area, there's a little diagram that looks like this in your handout, beautiful water painting. And so you're seeing that there could be oil inhalation and ingestion, and that they're running into immune system problems. So one of the things that happens when you're exposed to oil is your immune system can kind of shut down, and then secondary infections or diseases that you should usually be able to fight off get you sick. So we're seeing a lot of secondary infections in these animals that are really a result of immune suppression from potential oil exposure. We're also seeing adrenal gland problems. If you guys know what your adrenal gland is, that's the organ in your endocrine system that's responsible for secreting stress hormones, or cortisol. So if your cortisol or your adrenal glands aren't working and you're not able to make those stress hormones in an event that is stressful, then your body can't react to the way that it should. And one of the things that cortisol actually does is help you give birth to your baby. So a lot of these pregnant moms that don't have functional adrenal glands aren't getting those stress hormones they need right before parturition or birth of their calf. And that's resulting in that calf having something called fetal distress syndrome through the birthing process. And when that happens, they can aspirate when they're in utero, and that results in them dying either during death or during birth and they're stillborn, or immediately after birth. So we're seeing a real high uptick in the number of dead baby dolphins in this area and in Barataria Bay. And that can really affect the ability of the population to rebound. So they lost, in Barataria Bay, they estimated they lost 80% of the population of dolphins in that area. Now the 20% that are left are having issues reproducing to replace the animals that died. So the impact on the populations of the animals in this area can be fairly significant. So that's basically, we have lots of teams of people. We have mathematical modelers to figure out what's going on with the population. We do photo ID and survivalship of the adults and calves of the area, and then we also do health assessments and stranding, or assessments on the animals that's stranded, to kind of wrap our head around what's going on with these animals. So just so you guys can see what happens with these health assessments in a little bit more detail, basically what happens is there's teams of people, biologists, veterinarians, researchers from all over the United States and really the world that come together. And there has been 2 long-term health assessments since 2010, and the Sarasota project since about the late 80s, I think it started in. And so Sarasota is in the west side of South Florida. And so those dolphins technically were not exposed to oil. So that's our healthy control population. So we go out there 2 weeks out of the year. They've been doing long-term health assessments of those animals. And then we use those animals as our control healthy population of dolphins. And then since 2011, they've been doing health assessments in Barataria Bay, Louisiana, which is by Grand Isle, for those of you that are familiar with that area. And that was a heavily oil-exposed area. And they wanted to see how those animals looked health-wise and if they could figure out why they were dying. And those animals, they found out during these health assessments, were very, very ill. So we have a very, very ill population, and then a population of animals that weren't exposed that are healthy. And now we're tying in the dolphins around the Dauphin Island area with these health assessments we're doing. And there's a lot of sampling and a lot of research that goes into it. So our initial time on the water, our week or two of time on the water, gives us enough samples and data to process to kind of keep us busy throughout the year. And the samples kind of go to numerous laboratories all over the United States for analysis. So a lot of people wonder how we do exams on dolphins, and it is a really complicated process, but at this point they're a very well-working machine. So it takes anywhere from 60 to 100 people and anywhere from, I would say, 8 to 10 boats on the water. And they have people that have been doing dolphin captures, is what they're called, where we're trying to rescue an animal that maybe is entangled in a net or it has a health problem for some reason. Or that when we're doing these health assessments, where they can basically bring this boat that has a net that launches out the back of it, and then they encircle the dolphins, and the dolphins swim into the net, and that allows us to get our hands on them and bring them over to the veterinarians for their health assessments. So there's a whole team of biologists that are responsible for the logistics of doing that safely for both the animals and the people. And we've been really, really successful in being able to do this. We've never had any injuries or deaths of animals. There have been a couple people that have been injured from the net, so it is a dangerous thing. We have EMTs on the water with us to make sure that we're okay, as well as our veterinarians. So once we have the dolphin in hand, like I said, there's a lot of samples that we take. The first sample we take is blood from the animal. It's the same way and the same processing that you would get if you had a general health assessment at your doctor's office, and then we check for a little bit more. So the main way that we take blood from dolphins, there's several ways that we can do it. This is our model for the day, Fluffy. So the best way is from the fluke veins of these animals. We keep the animals in the water as much as possible. So we have a team of people that are restraining the animals, just holding them up in the water. They're marine mammals, so their blowhole obviously has to be above the water for them to safely take breaths. And we basically hold up their flukes like this, and they have a bunch of blood vessels running along the bottom portion of these flukes. We take a blood setup just like you would see at your regular doctor's office, a little butterfly needle, and then these little vacutainer containers that if you've ever had blood taken, you definitely know what these look like. And we have an animal handler holding up the fluke of the animal, and then we collect blood samples. We collect a good amount of these tubes, probably about 20 tubes at least, but they're large animals, it's not a problem. They could collect 20 from you guys without having any issues. It's like donating, it's less than a pint of blood that you would donate. And then these samples get sent out to assess the general health. So we do a CBC chemistry to check how their immune system is doing and how their organs are functioning. And then we also look at things like stress hormones as well as pregnancy hormones to determine whether or not the dolphins are pregnant or not. The next sample that we typically collect is going to be blowhole samples. So for the blowhole samples, it's a non-invasive sample that we take where we just hold it over the dolphin's blowhole, and when it exhales, it kind of sprays mucus from its respiratory tract onto that plate. That allows us to look at the cytology of it as well as doing cultures of it to see what kind of bacteria are present within the lungs of the animals. One of the primary health issues that we're seeing in the bottlenose dolphins that have been exposed to oil are pulmonary lesions or lung lesions. So that means that they can get pneumonia very easily, and they think that that's the result of being exposed to some kind of toxin on the surface of their lungs, and then a secondary bacterial or fungal infection resides in that damaged skin cell layer that's in the lungs and results in pneumonia. And initially we thought that the animals were just going to get pneumonia from the acute oil exposure, but we're actually seeing that these lesions in these animals get progressively worse over time. So an animal that had just kind of low-grade lesions, just a little bit of pneumonia, those lesions progressively get worse, and it causes chronic fibrosis in the lungs, which is kind of like CPD, if any of you have heard of chronic pulmonary disease and people that have been smokers or something, very similar to that. So not having good lungs is also an issue when you are a wild animal and you have to chase fish that swim really fast. You actually do need to have good lungs, especially if you're a diving marine mammal swimming under the water. So we do think that these pulmonary lesions can affect the survivorship of these dolphins. So the blow plate sample is really, really important to assess the health. But can one of you grab the ultrasound? One of the better ways that we assess how the animals look on the inside is using an ultrasound. So this is like a massive doctor's appointment. So instead of just going to your GP and just having him check out your blood and stuff, now you're going to the radiologist and having a radiologist do a full body ultrasound to see what's going on in the inside of the animal. So these are a portable, do you mind just holding it up here with me? So this is a portable ultrasound of the dolphins. So this gives us a shot, oh, it sounds like it might die. Oh, maybe not, it's on. Yeah.
How long does it take for the whole exam?
We don't like to have the animals in hand more than 45 minutes to an hour. So it's pretty quick. Multiple things are happening at once. If you can see in that picture when we're taking the blowhole plate, you can also see in the background this little probe is on the animal. So the blowhole plates are being collected, the animal's receiving its full body ultrasound at the same time. And then they're also doing things like skin assessments and stuff. So there's multiple teams of people that have different roles to kind of expedite the handling time of the animals. So these ultrasounds are really cool. It's the same, the ones that they have at your doctor's appointment are much bigger and much more expensive and are not allowed in the water. And nor are these. They are water sensitive, but they're a little water resistant. They're a little bit tougher. So this lets us take a look under the surface of the skin of the dolphins to kind of look at the animals. So basically what we do is we start from the head and we go all the way back. Well, with the exception of if it's a female dolphin, the first thing we want to know is if she's pregnant. If she's in late-term pregnancy, we will not bring her up on the boat to weigh her. We'll take minimal samples and we'll let them go pretty quickly, actually. And that's for no other reason except we don't want to stress out a late-term pregnant mother. We've never had any issues with it, but it's just having an animal that's supposed to be buoyant in the water up on a boat that's pregnant is just not ideal, but it wouldn't be the worst thing that could happen. It wouldn't result in an abortion, but it could potentially stress out that mom a little more than we would like to. If we see that they're in first or second trimester, the second trimester, we most likely will not bring them up on the boat. The only reason why we like to bring them up on the boat is we can get a weight on them. And that's a way that we assess their health, like their body condition, whether or not they're thin or if they're overweight, which really rarely happens with wild animals. But we'll do this ultrasound and we'll start up here. Dolphins' lungs lay all the way along here. They're diving marine mammals, right? So they need a lot of lung volume. They take really, really big breaths. So as we're ultrasounding the animal through the lungs, it's going to be taking multiple breaths, and that will let us see different areas of the lung surface. But we can't actually see very deep into the lungs like you would if you took an X-ray. And then we move back here on the animals. Their kidneys lay like right around here, about the equivalent of their dorsal fin. So the adrenal gland that we talked about that they're having issues with lays just in front of that kidney. So we'll ultrasound and look for the adrenal gland. It's somewhat challenging to find sometimes, just a little guy, very important organ, but really small. And then we'll take a look at the kidneys, make sure the kidneys look good. We'll roll our probe to the bottom and we'll take a look at its intestines and make sure that peristalsis, or the movement in your intestines that's supposed to happen, is happening appropriately. And then we'll move under here, take a look at the liver. Dolphins don't have gallbladders, but they have really, really big livers. So we'll make sure that those livers look good. And then we move back. If it's a male, we'll ultrasound the testes. And then we come all the way to the back and ultrasound the colon. So this animal gets a full body exam of all of its thoracic and abdominal organs. And that allows us to see things that may not be so severe that it's changed the animal's blood work, but it will let us know if they have abnormalities in their lungs.
This major effort involving 100 people and 10, did you say, boats?
Yeah.
Is that for one dolphin, or would you be able to assess more than one?
We usually go out for about 1 to 2 weeks at a time, mostly 2 weeks for these bigger health assessments. And our goal is usually to catch anywhere from 20 to 30 dolphins and fully work them up. So for the most part, I would say we catch 2 to 3 a day, and we're out there. It's long days for sure. But that's mostly because we actually have to find the animals. We will not set a net on them, which is what it's called when we put out that circle net around them, until we know it's in shallow water that's safe for both the animals and the people. So we don't like to try and catch them in deeper water. So a lot of times we'll just hang out with the animals till they move into a good place.
So when you come across one that's, let's say, pregnant and in distress, do you intervene or you just let them back out, or what happens?
That's actually never happened with the health assessments themselves. A lot of times the animals in distress that we deal with as a team at the Alabama Marine Mammal Stranding Network are animals that show up on the beaches that a member of public calls us and they're like, there's an animal that has an issue. There have been a couple animals that have been entangled in fishing line that our team has seen when we're out there, and we'll target those animals to try and capture them and then disentangle them from that entanglement. And as long as they're handling the handling well, we'll work them up. So if we do see an animal that needs a little help, we will do our best to help that animal. But luckily, the pregnant dolphins are tough animals, which is actually why it's scary to see that so many of them are being so negatively affected by the oil spill. And for the most part, the health assessments are not incredibly stressful on them. You would be surprised. They're large animals. They can weigh anywhere from 300 to 600 pounds, and that's pure muscle. But once you have them in hand and they realize you're not going to hurt them, they really calm down a lot. And we can see that when we're monitoring their heart rates and their respiratory rates. Initially, you know, they're breathing a little bit fast and their heart rate's a little bit fast because they're kind of wondering what's going on. And within 2 minutes, their respiratory rates, as long as everything's going well, drop down to a normal rate. So their breathing calms down and then their heart rate slows down to a normal rate too. So they handle the handling really, really well. So we haven't had to worry about that, luckily, up until this point. It is dangerous, though, and that's why we have, of those 60 to 100 people, about anywhere from 15 to 20 of them are veterinarians. So we have a huge team of veterinarians, and the biologists are also great at monitoring these animals. These are all dolphin experts from around the United States that kind of come together that make sure that that animal's well. And at the first sign of seeing that that animal is stressed when it shouldn't be, we'll release it early, and we won't complete the sample collection, which is fine. We would much rather have to go out and go get another dolphin than have to deal with a dolphin that gets hurt at our hands.
Do you have evidence that they easily rejoin their pod?
Yeah, so one of the other things we do that's really cool on these animals is we put satellite trackers on them. So we clip a satellite tracker just to the back of their dorsal fin right here. And that allows us to kind of understand where these animals are moving throughout the environment and also understand what they're doing behaviorally. Like, are they acting like normal dolphins once we let them go? Or do they go all the way out into the ocean where they shouldn't? And that never happens, or at least so far it hasn't. The satellite tag, so we've tagged 18 animals in this area. So if you ever see an animal that has a little tag like this, we would love to hear about it. So call our number, and we just want to kind of know where they're hanging out. But it's like a GPS in your car where it sends a location. It's programmed at different times to a satellite, and then that information gets sent to some researchers that are out in South Carolina in Charleston, and then they make up these really cool maps that I'll pass these around. But each one of these dots is a different GPS tracking that's been sent at a certain point during the day throughout several weeks, or this is actually just 1 week. So this dolphin, 6A2, he was a large male dolphin that we caught just on the Gulf side, right in front of the Sea Lab, actually, about a month ago. And we put the satellite tag on it and let it go to see what he does. And this dude just kind of, he was an older guy, you know, he was a big dolphin. I actually thought he was going to move more offshore. We still don't know a lot about the dolphins here. And we're trying to figure out if they stick to the coastline, if they kind of just move, they're just moving through the area, or if they kind of move offshore. We don't really know. And that's really important for interpreting our data and the oil exposure that these animals have. So all of this data kind of ties together to give us a better understanding of what's going on with these animals. So I'll hand these out. I have another couple. So this animal, 684, is another male. And this male we caught kind of right over in this area when we applied the satellite tag, which is this side of Dauphin Island. It's right out here. And then this animal hangs out a little bit on the bay side of the island, and then moves also to the west end of Dauphin Island a little bit too. But we're realizing that the dolphins in this area, based off of the data that we just started assembling about a month ago, are very site-fidelic, which means they hang out in Dauphin Island. The animals that are Dauphin Island animals hang out around Dauphin Island. There are some exceptions. This is an animal, so this is the Mississippi-Alabama state line right here, and these are a couple islands that are off the coast of Mississippi, and we do have some animals that actually utilize the area around these barrier islands in Mississippi as well. So that tells us that the health assessments that have previously been done in this area in Mississippi could also reflect the health of the animals, or some of the animals that are utilizing the area in Alabama. And if there is an oil spill in the future, it helps us also understand that the data that we're getting, or the impacts that are happening in Mississippi, if Mississippi gets more oiled than Alabama, it doesn't mean that our dolphins are necessarily safe, because some of our dolphins are moving back and forth into those areas. So I can hand out these two if you guys want to see where else they go. And besides that, we also take a number of things to test contaminants. We do a biopsy punch for these animals. It allows us to get a collection of the skin and the blubber of the animals. Dolphins have a blubber layer that's about 1.5 to 2 inches thick, and that's fat. So a lot of the contaminants in oil, and just contaminants in general, are something called lipophilic, which means they love fat. So when you ingest contaminants, a lot of times they actually get sequestered and stored in the fat in your body. So if anyone has had a biopsy at a doctor, it's the same, a skin biopsy, it's the same way. We numb them with lidocaine, and then we take one of those punch biopsies, one of those circle little biopsies. It's about 8 millimeters, so it's pretty small. And we take a full thickness biopsy of their blubber, and then we can send that out to assess the contaminant exposure of that animal over a certain period of time. Something that I think is really, really interesting is female dolphins have a much lower contaminant level than male dolphins. Does anyone have any idea why that would be? Adults, I should say. So basically what happens is when you are nursing your young, you're mobilizing your fat to turn that into milk. So their first baby, so once a female dolphin becomes sexually mature, when she has her very first baby, that baby is not very protected, unfortunately, because all of the contaminants that dolphin has stored up for the past 7 years are in that fat layer. So all of those contaminants, not all of them, but a lot of them, it's at a very high concentration, get mobilized and put into their milk. And they've seen this in the Indian River Lagoon, which is off the east coast of Florida, that the survivalship of the first calf of a mother is almost 0%, because they're offloading so much contaminant into that baby.
When you say fresh, you mean first after exposure?
Or first ever. Those animals are actually not oil exposed. They're exposed to more of pesticides and other contaminants. So that research has been kind of the foundation for us looking at the blubber biopsies in these oil exposed animals. But it's basically the first calf that mom has in her life in the Indian River Lagoon is probably not going to make it. And that's because it's exposed to such a high rush of contaminants right when it starts nursing.
How long do those contaminants persist in the blubber?
They can persist for a lifetime, which is why males have a really high level of them. Males don't do any of the childbearing or lactation, so they never mobilize those contaminants. Those contaminants build up throughout their entire life. And this is with the Indian River Lagoon dolphins in South Florida area. Those male dolphins actually have a lower life expectancy than most male dolphins because they're building up such high contaminant levels. And they never offload them, that they just can't live quite as long. So that's what's causing immune suppression in those animals too. I've been really surprised at how habituated your dolphins in Alabama are here. They basically think that a food source is recreational shrimp trawl boats and fishermen, and they can always outfish them, and that really makes some fishermen angry. So we definitely say that if a dolphin approaches your boat, just observe them from a distance. If you do feed them, that actually is a negative thing, because that teaches them that food comes from boats, and then one day when they approach a fisherman that's a little bit less friendly, they're at risk of being injured, shot, hurt from those fishermen. It is something that we do see in the animals that we necropsy here. And so do your best to keep a distance. And actually, we've been starting to do some photo ID. There's a calf that's entangled that we're trying to disentangle, so we've been on the water a lot monitoring that animal. And I've definitely learned that the further back you stay, the cooler stuff you can see because you're not scaring them. So they'll hang out in the area a little bit. The babies usually start playing and like jumping and doing cool stuff. So actually, the further back you are, the cooler like show that they're going to put on for you. And obviously you can get bit by these animals too. And if you do see them in areas that you're fishing and they're like trying to pull fish off your lines and stuff, it's best to just pull your gear up and find a different place because they're going to beat you every time, and it does risk them getting entangled in fishing lines. And then if you do see a stranded marine mammal on the beach, we just had a pygmy sperm whale, which is kind of rare. If you see a marine mammal on the beach, never push them back into the water. They have showed up on that beach because they're scared to drown because they're so weak and sick most of the time. So you can give us a call and we'll show up and bring them to the hospital if that's where they need to go, or if they're too sick, which a lot of times they are, because by the time they reach that level of desperation to drive themselves up on shore, they're pretty far gone sickness-wise. We can, instead of having them slowly drown or suffer, we can humanely euthanize them, which is something that we have in veterinary medicine that we're very lucky to be able to do instead of watching things slowly suffer before they pass. So dolphin moms are definitely like helicopter parents. Like they are, and dolphins are notorious for getting into trouble. So they have to constantly keep an eye on their little toddler because that thing's going to veer off and do something probably it shouldn't be. So if it's a good dolphin mom and an experienced dolphin mom, the calf will be with her most of the time. And
the mother staying with the calf?
well, if mom wants a break, there's aunties in the pod usually that she can kind of be like, watch the kid, I'm going to go fish for a little bit and need a break from it. So they do have like babysitting that they do too, but dolphins usually nurse their young for about 2 to 3 years. And they have a baby about every 3 years. And a lot of times the dolphin calves will stay with the mom until they're about 5 or 6. And the female calves are more likely to stay within their pod and not go somewhere else, whereas the male calves, and it's a good evolutionary trait, kind of peel away from that pod and find a group of ladies that aren't so related to them that then they incorporate into, or they hang out in what we call bachelor pods, which is adorable. It's like a little group of young male dolphins kind of trying to go out and meet some chicks. Yeah, exactly. Any other questions, guys? No, that's it. All right, well, thank you for having us. Appreciate it.